a legendary investor. He is also on the board of directors of Russian company Fosagra. Jim is also a famous author and father.
Oh, stop.
So I think everybody knows Jim here. So I would like to kick off this Q&A. We have about 1 hour, and I would like to kick off by asking Jim maybe to briefly tell us why you're in Moscow this time around, and maybe share some your fresh ideas, investment ideas. Bless you.
Good way to start. I tell you, I first came to Moscow in 1966. None of you were born in 1966. And I came away saying, this can never work. This is going to be a disaster. And for the next 47 years, I was pessimistic and negative about Russia, Moscow, didn't like Moscow, didn't like Russia. But a couple of years ago, something happened and I changed my mind. I now love to come to Moscow. I love to come to Russia. I'm optimistic about Russia, partly because, not because of her, but because of her company, Fosagra. I became a director. I've been optimistic about agriculture for a while, and Fosagra, as you may know, is a large fertilizer company, Russian fertilizer company. But at the time, I became optimistic about the future of Russia and the future of agriculture, and so obviously I was very interested in Fosagra. So a lot has happened to me and to Russia and to Moscow, but you all would be surprised at how exciting Russia is now, Moscow is now compared to what it was when I used to come here. I've been coming here for many years. You're fortunate to live at a place that has actually got a good future instead of many places which don't have a good future going forward. And to show you that I mean it, last week or week before, I bought I bought Russian government bonds in rubles. Russian government bonds in rubles. So maybe I've lost my mind. Maybe I've become deranged after being, having one view for 47 years. But now I'm keen on Russia, Moscow, Fosagra, Russian agriculture, and fertilizer. So that's why I'm here. It's a long version, but I've been coming here a long time.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. And
excuse me, can you have water with gas?
Yes, it's coming.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
so if you don't mind, maybe I will ask you to talk a little bit about how you see the world economy, the markets. Last week was a very busy one, so how do you see the financial world today?
Well, the financial world today is a pretty general question. You said they only have
sorry.
an hour. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut it down to less than an hour of answer. Essentially, for the past several years, the world has been living on artificial money printing. We have a very artificial situation where, for the first time in recorded history, we've had every major central bank printing huge amounts of money. This has never happened before. Japan, Europe, Britain, America. Interest rates are at rates where they've never been in recorded history. So we have a very unstable and difficult situation facing us going forward. It's been 7 or 8 years since America's had a recession, and I'll use them as an example since it's the largest economy in the world. Now, in American history, every 4 to 7 years, since the beginning of the Republic, we've had economic setbacks, consolidations, whatever. So we're overdue. It doesn't mean we have to have one, obviously, but there are many things in place, which means that the world is facing a recession coming up. It's already happening in many places. Japan is already in recession. Korea, whether they will admit it or not, is in recession. Parts of Europe are in recession. Look out the window. Russia's not having good times these days. So the recession has already started. The New York Stock Exchange, as an example, most stocks have been going down for nearly 2 years now. In 2015, for instance, twice as many stocks were down as up on the New York Stock Exchange. And as you all know, markets sometimes are pretty prescient in discounting what's going on. A few stocks kept the averages up in New York. The FANGs, as they're known in America, Facebook, and a few companies. But stocks have been going down in the U.S. for a while, not just on the New York Stock Exchange, on NASDAQ as well. So all the signs are that the world is having problems and is facing problems. The people who've been getting all this money, which have been printed, and all this money which has been borrowed and spent, are having a wonderful time. If you're a stockbroker in New York, you think, heaven is here. Good times are here forever. But most people in the world are not having a good time, and even the ones who are, it's artificial and built on debt and money printing. So I hope that all of you are worried. I hope that all of you are becoming knowledgeable. I hope that all of you are becoming prepared, because we're going to have some very difficult times in the next 2 or 3 years. The good news, of course, is that all of you have job security, because somebody has to write about this. Somebody has to report it. So all of you are at the right place at the right time, because the world is desperate to know how bad it is and how bad it's going to be.
Thank you, Jim, for an optimistic opening. I would then...
You said thank you? Maybe you didn't understand what I said.
So let me maybe open to our reporters and friends and journalists.
Yes, you mind if I take off my coat? Even if you do mind, I'm going to take off my coat. So go ahead. You can ask me questions about anything.
All right.
Jim, if I may, I'm from Reuters. I'm Katya Golubkova. My apologies, I was...
I'm sorry, your name is what?
Katya. I'm Katya Golubkova, working for Reuters.
You're working for whom?
For them? For Reuters.
Reuters.
Yeah, Jim,
Reuters,
we have actually a mix of Russian press and international press here.
Okay. Go ahead, Katya. Yes, thank you.
It was a very interesting topic which you just touched about the policy of printing cash, right? About all major central banks, and the only central bank, a major central bank, which did not yet, at least officially, started to print money is Russian central bank. Yeah, we're in kind of watching what they're doing. Their recent policy statement was quite tough. What is your expectation about where the Russian central bank is going, and if you expect it to start printing money at one point or another?
Well, I will tell you that I am not a fan of central banks. Most central banks should be abolished. The world, I'll use America as an example. America's had 3 central banks in our history. The first 2 disappeared for good reasons. And the world can get along without a central bank, believe it or not. The world often has gotten along without a central bank. And the American central bank, again, I have to pick on one, is making a disaster for all of us. The good news, of course, is they might be abolished eventually, just as the first 2 were, because they have been making such a bungle. In 2008, the American Central Bank's balance sheet was 800 billion US dollars of government bonds. It is now nearly 5 trillion, up 600%, and a lot of it's junk. So I'm not a fan of central banks. Your central bank, that lady, happens to be one of the least bad in the world. I wish she were running the American Central Bank. If she's looking for a job, I would recommend her, which would be, she would be sure not to get it. But I wish she were running other central banks. She and the guy in India are less bad than most. I have watched her. I've never met her or anything, but I was shocked that she let the currency float, that she didn't try to step in and do something about the currency. Now, I don't know if she's being told that or if she's the one telling, but she certainly has been pursuing proper policies. Listen, I never met her. I should ask you, but I would suspect she's not going to print money. She knows that printing money will just make the situation worse in Russia rather than help. And I don't see that it would do any good here any more than it's done any much good in the rest of the world. So I commend her. And I doubt if she will print money, but you probably know better than I do. You should ask her. But you can tell her that at least one person thinks she's terrific. Or thinks she's less bad than the rest of them. I cannot bring myself to say there's any such thing as a good central banker. But she's certainly less bad than the others.
Absolutely. Next time when she has her quarterly briefing, we will do that. Unfortunately, last one was just this Friday, so we're a bit late into it.
Well, I mean, that doesn't really matter. I know that she's one of the least bad, and there's a pretty big group of bad ones out there, but she's less bad than the rest.
Okay, if I might ask, so you're in
Sorry, what is your name?
Siranush. Siranush.
Siranush.
Yeah.
Is that Russian?
No, Armenian.
Oh, are you Armenian?
Yeah.
Oh. You're from Armenia?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Is it bad?
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
Have you grew up in Armenia?
No. I was 2 years when my family moved
So
here.
have you ever been to Armenia?
Yeah, twice.
Twice? Once when you
Have
were
you?
2?
Have you?
Yeah.
You like it?
I've driven around the world a couple of times, and
Okay.
I went through that part of the world. Wow, and I remember that the Russians always used to, whenever we would be at a restaurant or a bar or something, he would always say, those are Armenians, those are the smart ones, those are the rich ones. So
Okay.
the Russians used to think, anyway, that the Armenians were great. Anyway, carry on, I'm sorry. I don't meet many Armenians, as you can see.
Cool. So, you're
You have a name card?
enthusiastic.
You have a name card?
Sure, I think you have my card already.
I don't.
You do. I gave it to you.
It doesn't mean I have it.
Yeah, okay, so now you have it again.
Okay.
So you're enthusiastic about investing into Russian market.
I didn't say I was enthusiastic about investing in the Russian market. I am investing in the Russian market. I'm not enthusiastic about investing anywhere right now. But I
You have
did,
to.
a few days ago, a week or so ago, made more investments in Russian government bonds in rubles.
Okay, so.
But if I were enthusiastic, I'd be buying a lot of stuff in Russia. But I'm not buying a lot of stuff anywhere.
What are you doing then?
I'm sitting and looking out the window. I'm watching. There's
Then-
trauma coming. I have sold short America. I'm long some Asian stocks.
Yeah.
But these are positions that I put on, weeks, months ago, and I'm sitting and watching.
Okay,
So
the
mainly
way,
I'm watching.
the way you describe it is like we're in big trouble, and you think United States are in a bigger trouble than Russia.
Sure. Now,
Why is that?
in March of 2016, well, first of all, Russia's already collapsed. The American stock market theoretically is near its all-time high. So if one looks at the surface, America looks to be high, Russia looks to be low, and I'm sure your Armenian parents taught you to buy low and sell high, and so Russia's already collapsed. I'd much rather buy something that's already collapsed and hated. The Russian stock market is one of the most hated stock markets in the world, by the world. The American stock market is loved. I'm sure your parents taught you, sell what is loved and buy what is
Okay.
hated.
So are you going to buy the Russian Eurobonds that are coming?
I don't know, oh, yes, I do know about them. I doubt it, because I'm not optimistic about the euro, and they're gonna be either in euros and maybe in dollars. I don't
Yeah.
wanna buy either at this point. If I buy Russian bonds, I want to buy ruble bonds.
Okay.
But the problem for me as an American is many Russian bonds are under sanctions. And I cannot just pick up the phone and buy any Russian bonds because there's sanctions. You may not know this, but just so you know. The West put on sanctions against
But
Russia. as you
yeah, do
No,
you
no, I
mean
know
the
you know that.
government bonds or
Government bonds. Many Russian government bonds are sanctioned, and I legally cannot buy them because I'm an American citizen. You can buy them. But I, as an American citizen, and many other Westerners, cannot buy legally Russian government bonds. There's some that aren't under sanctions, but most Russian government bonds are
Okay.
under sanctions.
So the ones you
It's
bought are
absurd.
not.
By the way, it's absurd.
It is.
It's absolutely, totally absurd. It's unjust. America started that whole thing. America now tries to blame it on Russia. But it is absurd, but it's a fact. So if I buy the ones under sanctions, I get into trouble, and I just as soon I'd be in trouble.
Okay. Thanks.
But I did buy some that were not under sanctions.
You found them.
I found some, yes.
May I ask, how much did you invest into Russian bonds?
Well, that's a wonderful question. You're obviously a good journalist, but I'm not going to tell you. I only invest for myself. I'm a simple private individual. I'm not a public fund or something. So, and I grew up in a family where my parents and grandparents always said, you don't talk about how much money you have. You don't talk about how much something costs. You keep all that kind of stuff to yourself. There are plenty of people now on Wall Street and the City of London, etc., who would love to tell you how much their car cost and their house cost and their art cost. I grew up in a different kind of family, I'm afraid.
Maybe you can give at least estimation of how small part of your portfolio does Russian bonds take.
Well, first of all, I don't know because I don't sit around. I don't have a committee I have to report to. This is my own money. I couldn't even tell you how much I'm worth. I couldn't even tell you how much I have in different countries, because what difference does it make? I don't have to report it to anybody. So the answer to your question is I don't know. And if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Okay, but I don't know.
Jim, talking about some of your investments, you mentioned already Fosagra.
Yes.
And you're not only a director, but you also...
That's public knowledge, that how many shares of Fosagra I own, so you can look it up.
Yeah, so you also invested in Fosagra. So have you been satisfied with this investment? Can you talk a
Well,
little
I'm
bit more
very
about
pleased.
it?
I'm very pleased with the company. The more I know the company, I'm very pleased with what I have found. I obviously did homework before I joined, before I said yes. Already been doing homework on Russia. I did homework on them, the industry. I told you I'm optimistic about the industry. And I have been delighted to find a Russian company and other Russian companies that are that well organized, that well managed. No, and the stock is near all-time highs. I mean, how many Russian stocks are near all-time highs? This one is. So yeah, no, I'm pleased. I'm happy.
Thanks.
I'm not suggesting you buy it, but I'll tell you, it's been wonderful.
But I'm not as expert in agriculture as you are. So you probably...
I bet nobody in this room, can anybody in this room drive a tractor? Not a single soul in this room can drive a tractor. What more do you need to know? Agriculture has a great future. I can give you many. Agriculture has been so bad for 30 years that the average age of farmers in America is 58. In Japan, it's 66. In Canada, it's the oldest in recorded history, etc. More people in the UK commit suicide in agriculture than any other field. Millions of Indian farmers commit suicide every year. It's been a disastrous business. More people in America study PR than study agriculture. Nobody wants to be a farmer. What more do you need to know? 30 years has been like this. Soon, it's going to be much more attractive, or we're not going to have any clothes or any food at any price. Agriculture's been a nightmare. Which means, you're supposed to buy low and sell high. Remember we discussed this a few minutes ago? We talked about buying low and selling high. Agriculture's low. And none of you can drive a tractor.
Jim, how much do you think the growth of import substitution in Russia and the sanctions have played into the outperformance of Fosagra?
Well, it's certainly helped here in the last year or two. Fosagra was doing fairly well before that happened, and has certainly benefited since. I mean, anybody in agriculture in Russia has benefited from all of these absurd policies. So that is certainly
So in the long term, you'd like the U.S. State Department to continue sanctions to benefit Fosagra and other agricultural stocks?
I'd like the U.S. State Department to be abolished too. All the mistakes they made over the past 200 years. No, sanctions are never good. These sanctions are absurd. As I said, it wasn't Russia who started all this. All this started in the U.S. State Department. What was her name? Victoria Nuland or something? Newland. No, these sanctions are absurd and unjust and shouldn't be there. And I hope that all sanctions have rarely been demonstrated to work anywhere in the world, any time in history.
So Russia was a massive net importer of goods and foods for many years, and this has been a stimulus to grow.
Of course it has. Yeah. Everything you say is accurate and correct, and someday the sanctions will come off, and then we'll see what happens to Russian agriculture. And all of you will be driving tractors by then, and that'll be the top. I hope the sanctions come off tomorrow. It may not help Fosagro, but it'll certainly help the world.
In terms of products, do you like Russian cheese?
You read the same newspapers I do? Actually, I have not had Russian cheese. I don't know if I've ever in my life had Russian cheese, even though I've been coming here a long time. Maybe tonight I'll have Russian cheese. And I'll let you
make sure
know.
it is cheese. 80% of the cheese apparently is not actually cheese.
What is it?
It's made out of soy milk or sort of palm oil, actually. Most of the cheese is here. So.
Well, I don't know, since you raised that question, but what is cheese? Does cheese have to be made of milk? Cow's milk? Sheep's milk? Goat's milk? I mean, I never really thought about it. I mean, I just thought cheese like you. Like cheese is made from milk. What is the definition of cheese? Why can't it be cheese if it's from soy milk?
This is all branding, isn't it, really?
Well, okay, I don't know. Okay, wherever I go to dinner tonight, I'll make them bring me something to show that it's real cheese.
These guys know the best places for cheese.
We'll help you out.
What's your view on Russian privatization? As a US citizen, you certainly can take on some assets, but judging what you said, you are not a fan of something apart from Fosagro. But in general, the timing is right. If we're talking about autumn, do you believe there will be a window for Russia to sell? At least it's not that bad as now.
Well, as Russia proved for many, many decades, state ownership is not terribly good for most companies. Well, not just Russia, many countries have demonstrated that state ownership is not the best policy. So I'm all for Russia selling everything. I'm all for everybody selling everything, whether it's Russia or Germany or North Korea, China, anybody. I'm in favor. Everybody should be privatized, including all Russian companies. And of course, it would help raise money for your treasury, which could help you have more money than you have now. So you tell the lady when you see her that she should encourage privatization as well.
She's not in charge.
I know she's not. I know
She's
she,
in charge.
but she can encourage it because people listen to her. That's all. I know she's just a central banker.
But talking about the window, right? There is a checkpoint in July. The sanctions will be redecided again. Yeah. So, and some people do expect that some sanctions will be softened or took.
Well, I certainly know that many people in Europe, certainly in Germany, aren't happy with the sanctions. I'm not the only person who know they're unjust now. And even the ones who don't know or care, many Europeans are not happy because they're suffering. Many of them are suffering as much as the Russians. And if you're quote, a statesman, you now realize that this is driving Russia to Asia. And in the end, it's good for Russia and it's good for Asia. It's not good for Europe and it's not good for America, especially this set of sanctions, because look at the borders. Lots of people can trade with Russia. Well, if they're in Portugal, maybe they can't trade with Russia, but look at the border. My God, there's thousands of kilometers of borders that are open to anybody who wants to trade. So this is helping Russia in the long term, helping Asia in the long term, and hurting the West.
No, talking about Russia and Asia, it's also kind of a tricky question, right? So Russia can be a hostage here, right?
A hostage?
Yeah. I mean, look at Yamal LNG. They cannot raise their cash just because the rates the Chinese are asking on the loans to the Imago NG are too high. So basically, of course, it is a cooperation. Of course, it is a move towards Asia and China in particular. But if you look at this alternatively, and alternatively, sorry if I didn't elongate today, then
But I said, and I repeat, that in the short term, it's causing problems, but in the long term, it's forcing Asia and Russia together. And yeah, in the short term, people are suffering, especially if you have to pay higher rates for, I mean, I would buy more of your bonds. I cannot, because I would suffer because they're under sanctions. They're absurd. Doesn't matter if they're absurd or not, I'll get in trouble if I buy the wrong bonds. So yes, in the short term, it's causing problems. In the long term, it's going to help Russia and Asia. But there's no question it's not helping at the moment. But don't worry, Russia's not going to disappear, I assure you.
Some bankers, when you talk about when anybody talks about this pivot to Asia, say that in Asia there is still not enough spare capital to be invested in the countries like Russia. What do you think about this? Is there a capital for Russia?
There's more spare capital in Asia than there is in the West. America is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. UK is, I can name you many, many others, France, Italy, etc. Japan has staggering internal debts. So there's more, I mean, the largest creditor nations in the world are China, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. That's where the money is. If there's any money to be available for investments, it's not in Italy, it's not in America, it's in Asia. Now, you say there's not enough. That may be, but in my view, usually if there's an attractive, secure place to invest, capital will go that way. Capital is pretty agnostic. It just wants to be safe and get a high return, wherever it is. And in my view, Russia is one of those places now. Now, that's not a common and popular view. As you know, as I said to this lady before, Russia is perhaps the most hated stock market in the world. Let me think if that's an accurate statement. Yeah, more than Argentina now. You know, we should ask Reuters, because that's the international. But is there any market that is more hated than Russia?
I believe you're right, it's the most hated one.
Yeah, well, that's great. That is great. As far you call your mother and tell her that Russia is the most hated stock market in the world, and I find that an opportunity.
Isn't there a reason for that?
Yeah, everybody knows the reasons that Russia is the most hated stock market in the world, and when everybody knows the reasons, that usually means you're making a bottom. If we didn't know why Russia was making a bottom, was so hated, then chances are something would come along and surprise us. But we already know. I mean, the bad news, maybe there's more bad news coming, but a lot of bad news is out and we know it. And one of the things that I have learned in markets is that when all the bad news is out and everything is down, it's often, usually an opportunity. Chinese have a word called wei ji, which means in crisis there is opportunity. One of their symbols, one of the characters is crisis and opportunities side by side. And it's a concept that started in China. In English we don't have a word like that, but it's certainly a very valid concept. In every crisis there's an opportunity. It may not be for you, you may be the crisis, but for other people there may be an opportunity.
Do you like an idea of Russian treasury bonds being printed in yuans? Would you invest?
Well, I'd rather buy them in rubles because the ruble is down. I own the renminbi. I own my second largest currency position, in fact, is the renminbi. But I had rather buy rubles. The ruble's down. The renminbi is near its all-time high. I'm a simple person. I like to buy things that are depressed rather than things making all-time highs. But I do own Chinese shares. I do own the Chinese currency. I had rather buy Russian bonds and rubles. But I'm sure it would help sell them, is help Russia sell them. And I doubt if they would be sanctioned. Guess you could. I guess they could be under sanctions. But, yeah, it's a good idea, but I wouldn't buy it.
In your opinion, as an investor with quite a big experience, would you recommend Russian finance ministry to do the test one here domestically in Moscow?
Wait, to
Invite-
do what? Test?
The test issue here in Moscow, on Moscow Exchange, or rather do it in China? What would be your suggestion?
Well, I would suspect you'd be better off doing it in Hong Kong or China because they're more interested in the renminbi. I don't, well, maybe, actually, I'm sorry, let me think about it, because the Russians have had such a horrible experience with the ruble in the last little while. They may be looking for an alternative. One thing I have found that when currencies collapse, people look for something else. They want to buy silver or eggs or something just to get rid of the currency. And so that might be, they can do it at the same time in both places. You don't have to do it in one or the other. You can offer the bonds in Hong Kong and in Moscow, which is what I would do. Hong Kong would be better than Shanghai, unless you could get those Chinese to make it convertible. See, the problem is the renminbi in China is blocked, somewhat blocked. It's opening up more and more, but Hong Kong or Singapore would be a great place to list to trade those, offer those bonds, and in Moscow. That's what I would do. But I'm not the Russian finance minister. I'm delighted to say.
Speaking about Russia and China in general, where do you see the new zones of cooperation in just a general view? Do you see
Everything. If you go out there to Siberia, agriculture, everything, the defense, finance, you pick it, tablecloths, everything. They need a lot, you need a lot, cars, anything you can think of. Defense, airplanes, trains, everything. The Chinese are spending a lot of money on railroads now. You know about railroads, they know about railroads. Everything. I cannot think of anything that wouldn't be an area of cooperation in the future.
Why do you think it's taken so long? There haven't been any serious projects other than oil and gas.
Well,
And even those haven't developed at the pace that.
Well, part of it is historic, for a long time you all wouldn't speak to each other. You didn't like each other. And it's only been in the last 2 or 3 years. It takes a while, no matter what it is, throughout history, for it to sink into people, for people to trust that it's real. I mean, look how long it took for the U.S. dollar to replace the British pound. It took decades. Even though any rational observer 80 years ago would have said Britain is going down the tubes, it's got gigantic debt, there's nothing, balance of trade is collapsing, et cetera, but it still took many years for the U.S. dollar to replace the pound sterling. I mean, you probably cannot conceive of that, but that's what happened. So all of these things take a long time because people don't know about it, they don't believe it, they don't trust it, they got to try it. These things just take a while. But it's starting to happen. You go to Moscow, there are a Chinese bank or two have opened up here. Now, you might say, and I would say, damn, why didn't they open up 10 years ago? Why didn't they open up 20 years? Why didn't it take till now? And Russia and China have started the same with friends. Why did it take so long? It's human nature. You can write a book about it, and you'll be rich. To me, it's inconceivable that every street corner doesn't have a Chinese bank. But even without this cooperation, but it's true, they do. I think there are more Chinese banks in New York than there are in Moscow.
money coming from China is essentially coming from a communist country, which, you know, like some other communist countries, are suspicious about, you know, sort of investing money overseas, whereas money coming from Europe and America, pre-sanctions, it flowed more freely. You know, I just don't see Chinese money flowing freely anywhere apart from China and other communist countries.
Well, you said China's a communist country. Let me tell you, they call themselves communist, but they are among the best capitalists in the world, and they may be the best capitalist in the world as we sit here in March of 2016. Chinese money is flowing everywhere, everywhere. You cannot imagine how much Chinese money is flowing into the U.S., in Europe, and Australia, Africa, South America, Kazakhstan. No, staggering amounts of Chinese communist money flowing everywhere these days. No, I with all due
Not to
respect.
Russia.
Well, again, and that's, I think, partly historic, and partly they didn't see the opportunities. And as you know, there was a hostility between Russia and China. You know, I hope you know these facts better than I do. There's this historic animosity that should never have happened in the first place, but it did, and now it's being rectified. But if I, well, the Chinese, don't think Chinese communist money is not flowing, because it's flowing everywhere.
Did you see eventually that Chinese long-term financing will move in where Credit Suisse is left or Goldman Sachs is left, you know?
Partly because the Chinese have more money than I do. Yes, I didn't know Credit Suisse has left Moscow,
The investment bank left 3 years ago, but, you know,
and Goldman Sachs has left Moscow.
but they're not providing long-term money to Russian corporates because of sanctions.
Okay, that's, again, yes, China's going to fill the vacuum. Who else is going to fill the vacuum? Not Merrill Lynch, not Morgan Stanley. It has to be somebody who's not, you know, even if the sanctions, if you can get around them, they're still an impediment. But for China, they're not an impediment. But you know, and also you got to realize that the Chinese are new to capitalism. They didn't have a stock market until 1990. Not that you did, but you know, they didn't even. So all this stuff about stock markets and bond market, all this is still new in China. By the way, before the Second World War, Shanghai was the largest financial center between New York and London. And then, of course, it disappeared with Mao Zedong. But it is coming back, and the Chinese government is now giving a lot of incentives to develop the financial industry in China. And I'm pessimistic about the financial industry in most countries of the world. I am optimistic about it in China because of that. Because they haven't had one for decades, and now they will.
What about our financial industry?
Which, excuse me, and that's part of the reason for the answer to your question. This is all new. Your financial, you didn't have a stock market either
Yeah.
for many decades, as you know. Yes, I'm more optimistic about the Chinese because the Chinese are giving huge incentives to develop their financial community. Yeah, I'm optimistic about yours, but I'd rather be theirs because A, they're bigger, and B, the government is giving all these incentives. And I don't, if Moscow is giving incentives to the financial community, I don't know about it. But if they are, I'd be more optimistic about yours.
And what about ruble? Are you optimistic about currency?
I told you I'm buying
why?
ruble bonds.
Right. Isn't it
I'm not
like
buying dollar bonds, I'm
Yeah.
buying ruble
But
bonds.
what?
Because the ruble's down.
It's just
There's a-
following the oil prices.
I understand that, but I explained before, oil is in the process of making a complicated bottom, in my view. And even if it's not, the ruble's also in the process of making a complicated bottom. You have a less bad central banker than other people. Other people are printing a lot of money. And throughout history, that usually balances because the people who print money, in the end, their currencies are weaker, and the people who don't print money, their currencies are stronger. So that's why. You know, the ruble is what's, who knows, 68 today?
Yeah, kind of.
68 to the US dollar. 2 or 3 years ago, it was 30.
Yeah, but it can be worse. It can be
Yeah,
80.
it can be 100.
Yeah,
It can be
it can.
2,000. I know, I've seen currencies collapse. I know how it works. Not my first time. Yes, of course it can be. I'm buying. Maybe I'm going to lose my shirt. But I'd rather buy the ruble than sell the ruble. I did buy the ruble. Not last week, I think it was the week before that. I have to look it up. And in the recent past, I bought Russian government bonds in rubles. I think Russia is going to pay its debts.
Mhm.
What that means is I think Russia's going to pay its debts. I think the ruble is near a bottom. And I think that interest rates in Russia are attractive enough that I want to invest here. Certainly compared to the rest of the world. I mean, what did I get, 10% or something on the government bonds? If I'd invested in those same bonds in Japan, I would have had to pay them. Interest rates are negative. Germany, I would have had to pay them. The Kremlin right over there, they would have paid me. You know, the Germans, I'd have to pay the Germans.
Yeah, but it only works if, like, ruble is not collapsing another time.
I understand, I know. If the ruble goes to 1,000 to the dollar, you won't interview me again. I assure you.
I have a deal.
What happens to me, I lose everything in that investment. That's not my only investment. But if the ruble goes to 1,000, I'll put it on my wall. I'll frame it, put it on my wall. It'll be more valuable as a collector's item than it will be in the market.
We have about 5 minutes left, and if there are no other questions at the moment, I have actually a question.
Okay.
Again, sorry. So you said that all Russian problems are actually known, right? When you were talking about that.
Well, lots of Russian, but
Yeah.
maybe there's more. For all I know, Mr. Putin is going to massacre 3 Chinese tomorrow afternoon. But as far as I know, basically the Russian problems are known.
Yeah. So can you maybe just expand a little bit here? So what are the main Russian problems that are known? Just sort of prioritize them.
The main problem is oil. Russia's currency, its economy. The most important single determinant is oil. Sanctions really weren't that important, in my view. Sanctions really weren't that important. They didn't help. They were the straw that broke the camel's back, but oil is the main factor in the Russian economy. For better or for worse. It's too bad that since Russia had these 25 years since the wall fell to adapt and change its economy, they didn't do very much. They did, I mean, a lot changed in Russia, I assure you, in the past 25 years, but they didn't make structural changes that could have made them more competitive and more balanced in an economy, for whatever reasons. And you're Russian, you decide that. So now, Russia has learned that there's an overdependence on oil. Agriculture, again, whether it's being forced on them or not, is now being given incentives. Fortunately for her and for me, and Fosagro. But by the way, I want to say Fosagro is not just dependent, in my view, on the fact that Russia now is under sanctions, agriculture under sanctions. That has helped. But this change was taking place anyway. You correct me if I'm wrong, or you step in if you want to. But Fosagro, I didn't become a director of Fosagro because sanctions were coming. I didn't know sanctions were coming when that happened. I became a director of Fosagro because Fosagro's doing a lot of the things that I think are good in a field that I'm optimistic about. So to go back about Russia, oil, sanctions, I mean, you name it. Economics problems in the world. There are economic slowdowns in many parts of the world, as we discussed earlier, and that has to affect Russia and many emerging markets, because all markets are affected when people are having problems. Japan is
I mean, if you look at the Russian economy, it had already stalled pre-sanctions and when oil was at 110 bucks a barrel. So that says to me that the issue is not necessarily the price of oil or the sanctions. It's something more structural in the Russian economy. And
Well,
has it been dealt with?
Yeah, that's why I repeat. It's too bad that in those 25 years, or in those 100 years, but in the last 25 years, that Russia has not made more structural changes. Yeah, no, I happen to, you're exactly right. There's no question about that. You have, what, 150 million people, more or less, here, vast natural resources, vast transportation possibilities. Why didn't Russia change more? You're making a very valid point. It's the point I was trying to make. That
Has it started changing? Do you see any evidence of Russia liberalizing?
I should ask you that question, but yes, I do. I will tell you that I told you this for 47 years. I was pessimistic. The reason I started changing was because something happened in the Kremlin. For many decades, if they didn't like you, they shot you or took your money away or put you in jail, then took your money away. That attitude, in my view, I have seen changes in that attitude in the Kremlin. Someone in the Kremlin now knows you can't just take the money and run. Don't think they're not going to do it to some people.
But
But
some people disagree with that assessment.
no, all I said was that there is an awareness that this is easy, we just grab the money. There is an awareness that if you want to attract investors, especially foreign investors, you have to treat them by the rules of the game. I have seen that attitude changing. I didn't say change. We talked before that these things take a while. But I have seen the attitude changing in the Kremlin, and this all takes a while. Why did it happen in 1990? You tell me. Why didn't Russia immediately open its markets, open its borders, open its everything, and say, okay, guys, come and manufacture. We give you incentives. I live in Singapore, and in Singapore in the mid-60s, there was a disaster. The British pulled out their troops, their forts. The only thing, Singapore was a swamp. They had nothing. And then the British left, which was one of, the British didn't have any money either, but at least there was some money. So Singapore said, oh God, what do we do now? And they set out to attract investors. They set out to attract educated, successful immigrants. They set out to find all the manufacturers they could. They gave them incentives to move to Singapore. And as you may know, they emphasized education. And as you may know, Singapore has been the most successful country in the world in the last 40 years. I mean, they were a disaster. The British, when they left, said, that's the end of Singapore. Singapore is going to sink into the sea. Well, Singapore...
Still might happen.
Well, Britain, no, that's another question. Anybody now? Yeah, I live there. But Britain sank into the sea in the next 40 years, and Singapore went through the roof. So I'm just saying, why didn't Russia in 1990 say, we got a disaster on our hands, what are we going to do now? You know the answer to the question. They didn't do anything along the lines of what you and I are discussing. Taiwan was a disaster. South Korea was a disaster 50 years ago. And for whatever reason, I mean, in 1970, South Korea was poorer than North Korea. 1970, North Korea was richer than South Korea. Well, you know the story. I mean, you know the difference now. The South Korea said, okay, what are we going to do? And whatever they did, not all of it was pretty, but they certainly, I mean, now South Korea is one of the 10 richest countries in the world. I don't see that Moscow said the same thing in 1990 and said, what do we do now? No, are you Russian?
No.
Is anybody here Russian? You ask the Russians. You ask the Russians or the Armenians why they didn't. A lot of countries did nothing. Some pulled up their socks and changed. Russia, fortunately or unfortunately, until recently, has not pulled up its socks. In my view, they're now pulling up their socks.
Jim, you were for 4 decades, as you said before, very bearish on Russia. When do you
More.
think
More than 4 decades.
More than 4 decades. Very bearish Russia. When do you think George Soros will become find Russia attractive, considering you guys lost $2 billion
No. I have not
in Russia?
had anything to do with Russia, with Mr. Soros since 1980. That's 36 years. You might as well ask me about my first wife. I want to repeat. I was bearish on Russia for 47 years. He and others came pouring into Russia in the early 90s, not me. The last time I invested in Russia, I was short the ruble in 1997, 98. When all of those guys were pouring into Russia, I was shorting the ruble. So don't blame that on me. No. I was negative. It's on Western TV many times, and these guys are going to lose their shirts.
Well, these guys like George Soros, who did lose their shirts in '98 default, probably haven't been back since. Do you see that they will come back again, or there has to be these structural changes that we discussed?
Well, you have to ask them. I doubt it. Usually you find, back to your and our discussion, usually when people lose a lot of money in a place, it takes a long time for them to come back. Maybe their kids will come back. It just takes a while because people feel deceived. To those people, if you say Russia, they hang up the phone. They don't want to hear the next question. I have to repeat, I was bearish for 47 years. If you've spoken to me, well, actually, in the 90s, I was shorting the ruble because I didn't think it could work. I happened to get that one wrong. How long? It took me, even after that, I still came. I made money.
Do you make money from the default?
Yeah, I shorted the ruble.
How much did you make from the '98 default?
Would you tell him I don't answer questions like that?
He's a smart guy. He knows what's lost.
I was, listen, it was all over the Western press that I was short the ruble in those days. So when you short the ruble, you think it's going to go down.
Did you make less money than George Soros made from breaking sterling?
Listen, I have spoken to George Soros in 36 years. You call him up and ask him what you want to, okay? I repeat, I have not seen, spoken to, written to, communicated with Mr. Soros for 36 years.
When I spoke to Mr. Soros, I think it was 8 years ago, we were speaking about Global Witness and his activities in Eastern Europe. And then when I asked him about Russia, his hearing went. It was like...
Well, that's what I mean. They hang up the phone. I mean, anybody who gets burned, especially when you go pouring in with great enthusiasm, and then you get burned, it takes those people a long time. But that's what we've been talking
So when
about.
the ruble hits 1,000, you'll not pick up the call.
Call me. Okay. You can be the test.
I will.
You can be. I gave you my card. You can test. But actually, the ruble goes to 1,000. Well, I hope I would be smart enough to double up and buy more. Because if the ruble goes to 1,000, that means there's real. Well, I guess oil's at $6. There's been government overthrow. The country starts dismembering. Starts breaking up. So if the ruble goes to 1,000, it would probably be a buying opportunity. If I'm still solvent, she can call. Okay? I'm not predicting that it's going to go to 1,000.
It's on the wire.
Or that it's going to. I'm not predicting the country. I'm not predicting the country's going to dismember. I'm not predicting that oil's going to go to 6.
Tell that to Bloomberg. I did not report from there.
It's a problem with journalists, you know. The next thing you know. Sorry. Anybody else have a question about anything?
Yes, I think it's the last chance to ask the question. Dan, thank you very much.
I was going to say one other thing about Russia that I suspect, well, none of you know anything about agriculture. There's another phenomenal opportunity, many phenomenal opportunities in Russia. And one of them is Vladivostok. Has anybody here been to Vladivostok? So there are 3 or 4 of us that have been to Vladivostok. I will tell you, when I first went to Vladivostok in 1990, it was a closed city. I wasn't supposed to be there. I could have gotten arrested if I got caught. I went, and then I went again in 1999, and starting to change. But I was there in 2012, and this is back when I started saying maybe I should change my view about Russia started. It was the APEC. I was speaking at the APEC conference. And I was stunned at the changes that had taken place in Vladivostok. Mr. Putin, or someone in the Kremlin, for better or worse, is putting huge amounts of money into Vladivostok with the idea that the Far East, especially Vladivostok, is now going to be a center of their view as international civilization. They built a university which they expect to be one of the great universities of the world, or at least of Russia. So anyway, if there were 6 of me, one of me would move to Vladivostok because of what is happening there and what the Kremlin is doing there, and the Chinese and North Korea is opening up very fast. So Vladivostok is a perfect place at the perfect time. So if any of you get a chance for your companies to send you out there to Vladivostok, I would urge you to do it. It'd probably be even more exciting than learning to drive a tractor.
There will be a forum in Vladivostok, an alternative to St. Petersburg Economic Forum in September. Are you going to attend the new
It's unlikely.
Vladivostok Economic
It's
Forum?
unlikely because I don't know if they pay me to come speak. Yes, but normally I don't. I'm a misanthrope. I make my own decisions, my own mistakes. For whatever reason, I'm better off doing things on my own rather than talking to. I get confused talking to myself. So, especially going to other people. So I doubt, but I doubt if I'll do it, but I do want to go to Vladivostok again because I'm so excited about what's happening in Vladivostok. So somebody asked me, you asked me about Russia and opportunities. That is one of the great opportunities of our time because Vladivostok, Medellin in Colombia is another very exciting city where things are happening that are very dramatic. But Vladivostok, Medellin, a few cities in the world are really, really going to be the cities we're all talking about in 10 years. So go to Vladivostok. I urge you all to visit. And if you go, you'll find the best lobsters. It's astonishing how good the lobsters are.
It's true.
At least we were the last time I was there.
They're even better.
I was in Sakhalin Island a few years ago, and the crab there is actually cheaper than chicken.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing that's out there. It is absolutely staggering what can be found in the Pacific Far East. You should go back. Go to Vladivostok. Okay, Harisha.
Хорошо. Thank you, Jim, very much.
Lupa. You know what lupa means?
What?
Loop.
Loop?
Sure, I'm not saying it right. Does anybody here know lupa? Nobody knows the Russian word is lupa?
Lupa. It's like, a glass.
No.
No, Lubo.
Yes.
Lupa.
Ah,
Am I saying it? Say it again.
Lubo.
Luba.
Lupa.
Anybody here know what luba means?
Yes.
Cheers.
Sort of.
It's like I like
It's
it.
an old-fashioned word. It's an old-fashioned Russian word. I love it.
Yeah.
I know old-fashioned people. That's why I love it. It means I like it. It's an old-fashioned word. It's most young Russians don't know it. Many old Russians don't know it. Okay, luba.
Luba.
I say it right?
Yes.
Luba.
Спасибо.
Harasho. Harasho. You know what Harasho means?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Jim,